I don't think any Bears fans are really caught off guard or surprised by the fact that Chuck Pagano wasn't going to be back as the defensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears in 2021. I don't think anybody was caught off guard by that. I don't think anybody was surprised by that. And I certainly don't think anybody is disappointed by that news. How could you be? In the span of a couple of years, the Chicago Bears went from having an elite defensive unit with elite level talent at all three levels of the defense that seemed like they had their best football and best days actually ahead of them, to a defensive unit that in big spots and big moments played some mediocre to bad defensive football. And I don't think you could look at that Bears defense and say that you're getting the maximum ROI. You're not getting the return on the investment. And you could say, well, you don't want to blame the defense because the problems with this team are offensive. Yes, to a large degree, but not entirely. Look, you have to understand, when you make the level of investment that the Chicago Bears have on the defensive side of the ball, in terms of trades, in terms of draft picks, in terms of just total allocation of salary cap space, you're paying for a certain level of performance that you're not getting. And while certainly the offense is a bigger problem when you look at the holistic picture here, the defense is not immune from criticism. The defense is not immune from being blamed for any of the problems of this team, because they invested so heavily on that side of the ball. And what you've seen, frankly, out of this unit the last 2 years, and I think specifically in 2020, especially in key spots and big moments and big games against competent opponents, was disappointing, frustrating, and flat out irritating. Now, you can believe that Chuck Pagano retired all the hell you want, but let's be in touch with reality. That's bullshit. You know it, and I know it damn good and well. It was an example of Matt Nagy looking for a scapegoat, just like he did the year before with Helfrich and Highstrand. You couldn't fire any offensive coaches this time because you had just brought some new ones in. So this time around, you got to look to the defensive side of the ball to scapegoat. Plain and simple. And let's also be clear. This is yet another reflection of the bad leadership within this organization. And just in general, and this is the nature of the beast in the NFL, and it's not exactly a good thing. Great leaders will sacrifice themselves for others and the benefit of others and the greater good of others. In the NFL and sports in general, leaders will sacrifice their people, their direct reports, so that they may survive, that they may thrive. We've got it totally backwards here, but again, that's the reality. Now that you know that Chuck Pagano's gone, it leads you to the answer of who's going to step up and be the next defensive coordinator of the Chicago Bears. And since there is apparently zero accountability for Matt Nagy, Ryan Pace, Ted Phillips, and this organization as a whole, like who's going to want to step into that fold and potentially be the next scapegoat? Who's going to want to step into the fold of a situation where, for all intents and purposes, you're dealing with a coach and a general manager at a minimum that are certainly going to be on a warm to very hot seat in 2021, who potentially wants to come into a situation and be a defensive coordinator for a year in a lame duck spot? Who wants to come in and be a defensive coordinator for a unit that has regressed quite a bit in the past 2 years? Like, this is not an ideal situation to bring in a truly top-notch defensive mind, a truly top-notch big-name defensive coordinator into. Because unless somebody's desperate for a job because they're out of the game, or they're desperate because they're with another team and they're maybe a defensive line coach or a linebackers coach and they want that next step, like nobody in their right mind would take this job, and who could blame them? So I was always assuming once this news about Pagano retiring happened, that ultimately, unless the Bears found somebody old or washed up or really desperate for the job, this promotion was likely going to come from within. Let's have no doubt about that, no reservations about it. I was surprised that it wasn't Jay Rodgers, because he ultimately left to go elsewhere, which I think also should be an indication to you that it's a sign of bigger problems that a guy who's already in a spot with great talent doesn't want to stay on the staff that he's a part of to become the defensive coordinator. You know why that is? Because, again, he's not desperate for the defensive coordinator job because he knows he could get it elsewhere. What he doesn't want to do is tie himself to a potentially sinking ship. So a lot of fans started pointing to Jay Rodgers as being the heir apparent, and he's not that. He's not that desperate. So the Bears went deep into the recesses of their coaching staff and promoted from within, not surprisingly. You know, this has got Bean Counter Ted written all over it. Well, you know, we can promote from within, and we can bump somebody up and skip a level and only have to pay them maybe 70 to 75% of the standard going rate for a defensive coordinator in the National Football League. But by God, that makes us dollars back. That just makes good sense. Football sense, that's not what we're in the business of. And we've got great communication and collaboration. And that's what you really need. Like, am I wrong? And of course, I'm sure goofy George McCaskey just sitting there, yup, gosh, we've got a young assistant that could step up from a safeties coach to defensive coordinator. I like the progressive thinking here. Yup. So Sean Desai, who reportedly is the first coach of Indian descent to be a defensive coordinator in the National Football League, will be taking the helm. Yes, Sean Desai, the guy who was originally part and brought in with the Mark Trestman era in 2013 as a quality controls assistant, who spent 6 years in that role between the Trestman era and the John Fox era and the first year of the Matt Nagy era before becoming the safeties coach in 2019. Not the secondary coach. He was in charge of a subset of a positional group. Not even the whole positional group. The Bears have taken a guy under the age of 40 with only 2 years of experience at a job that's basically 2 levels below and bumped him straight the hell up. Now, you might expect that in today's world if the guy was white. It just seems to be par for the course sometimes. So this is kind of a surprising move, I gotta admit. And I look at this move and I say, you're probably wanting me to rant and rave about it. You probably want me to... And the reality is, like, what the fuck were you going to expect or hope for here? This was about the best you were going to get. That doesn't mean that he'll suck or he'll fail or that he'll be some raging success. Just because he's young doesn't automatically mean he's good. Just because he managed a subset of a larger positional group for 2 whopping years doesn't automatically mean that he can't transition to being a quality defensive coordinator and defensive play caller. But it also doesn't mean that he's qualified for the role or that he's some type of wonder kid or genius. In reality, it's more of a reflection of the current reality of the Bears as a team and their plight and their situation and circumstance that they have put themselves in by rewarding mediocrity and tolerating and accepting mediocrity, but also creating a kind of lame duck environment that nobody in their right mind would want this damn job. Nobody. Who the hell else would want it? So of course Sean Desai is going to step up and say, you know what, I want this job. Yeah, because he's skipping a whole step in the career trajectory, career growth process. I can't freaking blame him. Because if anything now, even if this goes south for him in a year, and the Bears defense is so-so, or the Bears defense is good, but the team still stinks, and Nagy and Pace are fired, and he's ultimately shown the door, you're going to look at Desai, and he's reset the baseline in terms of where other teams are going to be bringing him in. Now he's going to be a defensive coordinator in the league. Some teams might consider him for a defensive coordinator role elsewhere. Or they will consider him for a step back, which is as a secondaries coach, but still higher than what he had before as a safeties coach. So by taking this move, he certainly has helped himself in the here and now and also in the future going forward. So for that reason and that reason alone, from his perspective, I 100,000% understand why he would have wanted this. You could say it's kind of a desperation move. It's more of a move of opportunity from him. Like, this makes sense. It resets the minimum baseline for if it goes south here, what somebody else might bring him into the fold for. Now, you've seen some people, I'm sure, talk on Bears media and Twitter and so forth and other articles on other sites talking about what this looks like. what his defense is going to look like, a return to a little bit more of the Vic Fangio style of defense, which I think certainly Bears fans will be very, very open to. Some of the players that either play under him or have played under Desai talked about what this means and some of the changes in how the personnel are utilized. And when you look at Pagano the last couple of years, like one of the major problems is how you utilize your personnel. So I think there could be an element here of Desai takes over and you get a little bit of a reverting back to 2017, 2018 Vic Fangio type of defense. It doesn't totally mean the same level of performance will be there. But more importantly, I think, because it's hard to do that after a couple of years of not being at that level. But what you could get back to is a situation where you're better utilizing the talent that you have, especially if you're not going to switch or convert to a 4-3 defense. Ironically enough, when you look at some of the investment that the Bears have made in some of their key spots, Robert Quinn's at his best as a base end with his hand during the 4-3. You could argue Khalil Mack is equally as effective in that. And if you were to sit there and have, let's say, a Bilal Nichols and a Akeem Hicks as your rotation, as your three techniques, and you put an Eddie Goldman and brought him back into the fold in 2021 as kind of your base nose tackle, like there's certainly some appeal there to me. Roquan Smith playing more of a traditional middle linebacker versus a 3-4 inside linebacker. But who was going to come in and really take this job with no promises or certainty past this year that's going to change that system? So it made sense for the Bears to go for some stability here by keeping somebody that the players are familiar with, somebody that's worked with guys like Eddie Jackson. You could argue, you'd be a little wondering like what he did with Eddie Jackson this past year, but that seems to be more on the player than the actual coaching itself. You know, this is one of those moves that it benefits Desai greatly. It's about the best, frankly, that you were going to get. I think it should be a representation of just how bad it was that a Rodgers didn't want to stick around and he wanted to go elsewhere for that opportunity. Like, that is what fans should glean out of this as much as anything. It's not an excuse to rant and rave, though, because, again, the situation and circumstance that we're talking about here, what the fuck else were they going to do? This is about the best that you get. It's a mediocre hire for a mediocre organization. Plain and simple. It may pan out to be better than a mediocre decision for sure, but objectively, based off of current realities, they're reaching here. Reaching quite a bit. Taking a guy that wasn't even in charge of an entire positional group. He was in charge of a subset of a positional group. This is almost like you're promoting somebody from assistant store manager to district manager, and you're totally skipping the store manager step, if we put it in a retail context. Not something you typically do. Doesn't mean it can't work. But I mean, what the hell else were you really expecting at this point? Right? You really think somebody worth a damn? And I'm not saying Sean Desai is not worth a damn. We don't know what he's worth at this point. But somebody that was established and credible, somebody else that was truly, unquestionably ready for that responsibility in that role, nobody in their right mind was going to take it, and that's why nobody did. That's why you heard them talking about interviewing Mike Singletary. They're desperate. And seeking out people that were desperate for an opportunity, that wouldn't care about the long-term outlook because they're just trying to get a job in 2021. That's what it comes down to. This is a bad opening, a bad job that nobody worthwhile and worth a damn really wanted. And the Bears, I have to really hope that this Sean Desai hire is better than the Chuck Pagano hire. Otherwise, you could be in for an even bigger disaster in 2021.